Hello guys, you are welcome to my YouTube channel once again, and in this tutorial I'll be showing us how to model a simple burger from scratch to finish. And let's proceed now. So before we start, I'll show us how to navigate around our Blender scene. So the first thing you know in Blender is how to navigate around the Blender scene, and to orbit your screen first, you use your middle scroll button to rotate your middle scroll button in your mouse. If you hold it, you can rotate your screen sideways. And if you hold shift and your middle button, you can move your 3D windows upwards, downwards, and sideways. And if you hold control and middle button, you can zoom in your 3D windows. Now, so we have what we call manipulation tools. These are our manipulation tools here. We have our select tool, we have our cursor tool, we have our move tool. So if I select this box, I can move on the x-axis, I can move on the y-axis, and I can move on the z-axis. So Ctrl Z to undo that. This red line on our grid denotes the x-axis, and the y line on our grid denotes the y-axis. That means this green line denotes the y-axis, while the red denotes the x-axis, and this blue line denotes the z-axis. So we have our rotational tool. We can rotate our object here. We can also scale an object also on the y-axis, on the z-axis, and on the x-axis. Now let's go straight to the point of modeling our burger. But first of all, we will left click on this cube here and click delete on our keyboard to delete that cube. And now how to add an object into our Blender scene. We say Shift A on our keyboard, the add menu comes up, we go to mesh and we say cylinder. We can come to this point here where we have add cylinder here and click on this chart here, and we can make some adjustments. We can reduce the radius a little bit, and let's reduce the depth also to this point. So if you click 1 on your keyboard, that's for front view. If you click 3 on your keyboard, your notepad keyboard, that's for right view. If you click 7 on your keyboard, that's for the top view, orthographic view. If you keep click 1, so this for front view back. So for edit mode, to go into edit mode so that we can edit our mesh, we say tab on our keyboard, or come to this point that we have object mode and say edit mode. There are what we call vertices, edge, and faces. So this is a vectors. If you click 1 on your keyboard, that's the shortcut key for vector selection. You can also come here to select vertices selection here. So this second one here is for edge selection. These are edges, and this third one is for face selection. So what we're going to do now, we're going to say 3 on our keyboard for face selection. Select this face and say Ctrl B to bevel this face. So if I scroll my mouse upwards, I can add what we call loop cuts to this. So I can bevel to this point here and add loop cuts to my mesh. So I can bring it downwards to this point and add loop cuts. So I can now say OK. I can now left click to OK that. I can also select this face also and bevel this, say Ctrl B to bevel also, and reduce the numbers of loop cuts and say OK. So I can select this face and do what we call insert. So you can rotate your screen like I said by holding your middle button, your middle scroll button. Rotate your screen this way and say I to insert this face. Move your mouse inwards, I to insert, I to insert, and I to insert. So what I will do now, I'll add what we call subdivision surface modifier. But first, let me select this face and insert this. Say I to insert this. So click tab to go back to your object mode. Now I will add the subdivision surface modifier to make this our mesh looking very smooth. I will select it by left clicking. I'll come to this place that says add modifier. This is what we call, these are modifier properties, and I'll come to add modifier, click on this arrow downwards and say subdivision surface modifier. Now we have a level of 1 subdivision surface modifier on our mesh. I can right click on it and say shade smooth, and now it's now looking very smooth. So I will say 1 on my notepad keyboard for my front view, and I will say G on my keyboard to move. That's the shortcut key to move an object, and I will hold control and snap this burger upwards to this point. What I will do again, I will say arrow, which is the shortcut key for rotate, and I will say X on my keyboard on the X axis, and I will say 180. That means I'm rotating by 180 degree on the X axis. So now I have my burger turned upside down. So it's looking nice like this. So what I will do now, I want to create the vegetables. It's very simple, the same process. Shift A on your keyboard, go to mesh and say cylinder. I will say I can come to my manipulation tool and move this upwards to this point, and I'll say 1 on my keyboard for front view. I will say Alt Z for wireframe mode so I can see through my object. So when I say tab, I'm going back to edit mode. If I click 1 on my keyboard, that's for vector selection, and I will window drag on all these vectors out here, and I will say delete on my keyboard. So the delete menu comes up, and I can either choose delete vectors or delete edges or faces. But now we are deleting these vectors, so we'll say delete vectors. I will say Alt Z back again for my viewport mode, and I will say 3 for face selection. I can also do I to insert these vectors, I to insert, and I to insert also. So what I will do next, I will say 1 for vector selection. I will select one of these vectors, I will skip one, and I will select another one, and I will skip one. So I will do that one for all the vectors. Skip one, select one. What you're going to do next, we're going to push all these vectors upward. So just try and ensure to skip one of these vectors and select the other, and try to skip one and select the other. So after we've done that, we'll come to our manipulation tool to move all these vectors upwards like this, and say S on our keyboard to scale. So I can also select these vectors downwards, the one that we skipped, select all of them, and we're going to scale this inwards also. So try as much as possible to select all and say S to scale. The shortcut key to scale is S. So we're going to scale it inwards by pushing your mouse a little bit inwards. So I'll do Control arrow to add a loop cut, Control arrow to add loop cut here. So I can add 2 loop cuts, and that should be okay. And I will come to my modifiers panel once again, and I'll add what we call solidify modifier to this mesh. So I will come to this place here and say add modifier and add a solidify modifier. I'm going to make this 0.03, and I will say tab on my keyboard back to my object mode, and I will come to this place that will say apply and click apply to apply that modifier. Now I will add another modifier called the subdivision surface modifier to ensure that this vegetable is looking smooth. I will come to my add modifier panel again and say subdivision surface, and I can say levels of 2. Now it's looking smooth, but we still have some kind of blocky signs, some kind of edges. So what I'll do again, I will right click on it and say shade smooth for it to look more smoother, and I will say S to scale and Z on the Z axis. So I'll push my hands upwards, having something looking like a vegetable. I still say S and Z to just give it some few details. Push downwards also. So I will say 1 on my notepad keyboard, and I will push this vegetable downwards. I can say 7 for my top view, and I will say S to scale this a little bit. And I'm going to move this upwards, resting on this burger here. So I have my floor downwards and the vegetable up here. So what I want to do next, I want to create the meat for this hamburger. Still the same process. Shift A to add an object, go to mesh and bring in a cylinder. Move the cylinder upwards on the Z axis. You can scale it a little bit and say S and Z to scale on the Z axis also to this point. We can say tab on our keyboard for edit mode, and what we want to do now, we'll say 3 for face selection. You can also select this face by holding shift to select multiple faces. So if I hold shift, I can also select this face. So whatever thing I do on this face will actually affect this other face. Now if I say I to insert this face, and I to insert, I to insert, I to insert, and I to insert, and if you watch now, this other face is also inserted. So what I'll do, I'll add a loop cut to this, and I'll say Control arrow to add loop cut. I can add two loop cuts here, and left click to OK that. I can say one on my keyboard for vertex selection, and I'll come to where we'll have proportional editing and activate proportional editing. So I want to like kind of tweak this meat to just have a deformed shape. I can select all this and push this upwards, but I have something like a ring. So I'll use my mouse to scroll in and out to increase or decrease the strength of my proportional editing, but I'm going to scroll this a little bit backwards. So I can now push upwards to deform this meat. So you can deform it in any way just to create some kind of shape, kind of pop out also. So you can select some vertices and grab and move some vertices. Would have done this on the sculpting mode, but I think I just prefer to do it manually, and so it's going to be kind of very basic for us to understand. So I can push some vertices, grab some vertices and push upwards, grab some vertices, push upward. I think this is enough. So I will say tab for my object mode. So what I'll do again, I will come to my add modifier panel and add a subdivision surface modifier to make this smooth. I can also right click on it and say shade smooth to make it more smoother. So now I have something looking like this, like a meat. I can say S and Z to give it some depth and thickness. So I'll say 1 on my notepad keyboard for my front view, and I'll push this meat downwards. So I have something looking like this. And now what I want to create again, I want to create what we call our pasta. So we can also create tomatoes, create some different looking things. So I can also select this and say Shift D and say S to scale, and scale it and bring it upwards. So I can also say tab again for my object mode, for my edit mode, and I can cage this, and I can also select all these two and make some adjustments. So I want to use this now for my tomatoes. Instead of creating new mesh, you can duplicate a mesh and kind of tweak it to suit what you want to do. So I can now maneuver with this mesh. You can just grab some vertices and push. So this will just be our tomatoes, and I can now say Shift D to duplicate an object. I can click 7 on my keyboard first, and let me move this guy to this point. I can scale it to be very big also. So I want to keep this very simple. I say Shift D to duplicate. I can push this guy this way. Shift D to duplicate. I can bring this guy this way. I can say Shift D to duplicate. So I can just have only just 4 tomatoes, and this is okay for me. For this point, I think this is okay. So what I want to do next, I want to create what we call our onion. It's very simple, the same process, but we're not going to duplicate this mesh. We'll bring a new mesh. We'll say Shift A, go to mesh, and let's bring in a cylinder for our onion. I'm going to push this guy upwards and say S to scale uniformly, S to scale again, and I'll say X and Z to scale on the Z axis, making it look like an onion. I can say S to scale, and I'll say tab for edit mode. I will have to select this face, 3 for face selection, select this other face beneath. So what I will do up here will happen down there. So I will say I to insert, I to insert. Since it's an onion, we have kind of these multiple rings in an onion, and we just have to do it over and over and over and over and over again. So just say I to insert, I to insert, and I to insert. So we just keep inserting until we get to the last point here, and I can leave it this way and say I to insert. So what I want to do now, I want to select all these spaces. I will hold Alt to select this face in the ring, and I will hold Shift and Alt. I will select this other face in the ring. So I'm skipping one one face ring, and select the other one. So I'll hold Alt again and Shift to select that, skip that, hold Alt and Shift to select and skip that. So hold Alt and Shift to select that. So what I will do now, I will say E on my keyboard to extrude. That is the shortcut key for extrusion. I will say E and I will extrude it just a little bit like this. So what I will do now, I will click slash on my keyboard to hide every other object except this. So I will carry out the same process for this other place also. I will hold Alt and select these faces around the loop. I will hold Shift and Alt, skip one and select those faces. Ctrl Z. So hold Alt and Shift, skip one loop and select the other one. And now we're going to extrude this also. So I'll do Alt Z so I can see my region of extrusion, and I will say E on my keyboard just to extrude a little bit, and I will say Alt Z back again. I can click slash on my keyboard where I can see my other objects back, and I will say tab, but first I will add just a loop cut here, Ctrl arrow, and add 3 loop cuts here also. And what we'll do, we'll say tab for our object mode. I will come to our add modifiers panel and say subdivision surface modifier of 1, and I will right click on this and say shade smooth. So we have something looking like an onion. I can also say 1 on my keyboard to bring this downwards. I can say S and Z just to give it some little bit thickness, and I can now push this guy here resting on our tomatoes. I can say 7 on my top view. I can also say S to scale to make it kind of bigger. You can just push this guy this way to this point. I can say Shift D to duplicate. I can say Shift D to duplicate. So I just want to have like 3 onion here and scale this. You can also move this way to this point and just try to just play around and push things and shift things. So I have something looking like this. You can just push this inwards a little bit. So what I want to create next is what we call our pasta, like kind of flat surface resting on this burger. So that's very simple. So what we'll do now, we'll say Shift A on our keyboard, we'll go to mesh and we'll bring in a plane this time around. So I will say 1 on my keyboard and I'm going to push this plane upwards to this point. I will say tab for my edit mode, and I will say Ctrl arrow to add 4 loop cuts. So scroll your mouse to add multiple loop cuts. You can scroll your mouse to add multiple. You can reduce. You can scroll your mouse also downwards to reduce your loop cut. So we'll make this 4, and we'll make 4 here also. And we'll say 1 for our vector selection. We'll select all these vertices here. Hold Shift to select vertices, multiple vertices. Hold Shift to select multiple vertices, and let's push this guy downwards. Push all of them downwards and say S to scale. So what we'll do now, we'll select these vertices also. Hold Shift to select these vertices also that is close to the one that we just pushed down. And select them. So we're going to still push this down also like this, and we'll say S to scale inwards to this point. Okay, let's see scale one more time. S to scale. I think this is okay now. So what we'll do now, we'll select these vertices also, and I'm going to push them downwards also. Hold Shift to select these vertices, push them downwards also. You can also scale them, S to scale for them to come close. So you can do this also here. Select this, hold Shift to select this, and let's push them downwards, and we can say S scale also. So we can offer proportional editing first, and we have something looking like this, looking like the pasta. So what we'll do now, we'll add what we call a subdivision surface modifier, a solidified modifier to it. So we'll come to our add modifier here and say solidify, and let's give this a thickness of 0.03 0.03, let's make it 0.04. We can say tab for object mode, and let's apply this. Click on this arrow pointing downwards and say apply. We can say tab again for edit mode. We can say control arrow just to add a loop cut here. We can make this 2, and we can say tab again, and let's add what we call subdivision surface modifier. So this now gives our pasta smoothness. We right click and say shade smooth. Now we have something looking like this. We can increase our subdivision levels to 2 to just give it more smoothness. So we have something looking like this, but now it's as if our pasta is covering our tomatoes. So we can come and select all these tomatoes and onion here, and we're going to push them upwards. So just select them, and let's say 1 on our keyboard for our notepad front view. So we can bring this down up here. So we can make some few adjustments also. I can select this, so I can push this upwards also. So we can rotate them also, just to give them some feel. Arrow to rotate, and try to move your mouse to that direction. Arrow to rotate. Do the same here. You can say arrow to rotate. You can say arrow to rotate. You can click on this and say arrow to rotate. So we have something looking like this, and I can now push this to this point. So just try and as much as possible to just play around the shape and position some things also. So I'm just trying to make this very simple. So what I'm done with the creation of this burger. So I'll say 1 for my front view. So instead of me creating this follow for the top, I can select this and say shift D, duplicate it. I'm going to move it upwards to this point where I want it to sit on. And what I'll do, I'll carry out the same process like I did during the course of this training. And I'll say arrow, I'll say X, I'll say 180 to rotate upside down in 180 by 180 degrees. So I have something like, so I can now push this guy downwards. So now I have my burger all set out. I can say 1 again. I can select all. We just drag to select every item. I can say S and Z to scale on the Z axis. So it's going to look more like a burger this way. So I have something looking like this. So what I want to create now, I'll create a plate. So our burger should be in a plate. I'll say shift A. I will come here and say mesh, and I will say cylinder, and I can just click slash on my keyboard to hide every other object. And I will say tab for my edit mode. I can say 1 for my vector selection, or Z. I will select this face, and I will say delete on my keyboard to delete that face. I will say Alt Z back again for my solid mode, my viewport mode. I can say 2 for edge selection. I can hold Alt, select all these edges. I can say E to extrude upwards. But first, let me just say 3 and select this face and click delete. Delete face. I will say 2 for my edge selection. Hold Alt, select all these edges here. Just push a little bit upwards. And I can say E to extrude and S to scale this. So I want the place to be kind of looking very small, not too big. S to scale to this point. So what I'll do now, I will say Control arrow to add loop cuts. You can add 3 loop cuts here. This is okay now. I can say add another loop cut down here. Control arrow to add just 1 loop cut down here. You can say 3 for face selection. You can say I to insert this face. You can say I to insert, and I to insert, and I to insert. What I'll do now, I will come to my add modifiers panel again, and I'll add a solidify modifier to this. I'll just give this plate a little bit thickness, and I can say 0.05 will be okay for this. And I can now come to my add modifiers again and say subdivision surface modifier. So but what I will do now, I will apply my solidify modifier first. I will say tab on my keyboard. and I'm going to apply this first. I'll click here and say apply, and I will right click on this and say shade smooth. So I have my plate now looking very smooth. I can say slash on my keyboard to unhide every other object. I can say 1 on my keyboard for my front view, and I'm going to push this guy upwards. I'm just ensuring that 1 again, and select this. I can say Alt Z, no, just drag and select every item here. Just keep selecting the plate also. Say Alt Z so I can see the bottom of this plate. I can push this burger to this point and say Alt Z, and I can now bring this plate downwards. So now I've created the plate, and we can also say shift. I think I should reduce the size of this burger. It's looking very big. S to scale, and I'm going to push downwards. So it should sit on this plate, Alt Z. I think it's okay this way. So I have something looking like this. Now I can now rename my objects in my scene. So it's very simple to rename object. I can select this. To rename an object is very simple. I can say F2 on my keyboard. I can call this plate. I can F2, select that, say F2, and I can call this top floor. Do the same downward, select this, say F2 on your keyboard, and I can call this down floor, down flower, not floor. So I can select this and say F2 and say pasta. And so try to do that. So to save time, try to do that. F2 to rename an object. What I will do again, I will create what we call our backdrop. One first on our keyboard. So I can say Shift A. I will bring in a plane, and I will scale this plane. S to scale the plane to this point. S to scale. Push this backwards and say Tab for our edit mode, and I will say 2 for edge selection. I will select this edge here and say E to extrude, and say Z on the Z axis. I'm going to push this extrusion upwards to this point, and I will select this edge, and I want to create kind of a smoothness in here. I will say Ctrl B to bevel this edge, and I will scroll my mouse upwards to add loop cuts to that region, and I will say Tab for my object mode. I will right click and say shade smooth. Now I have a kind of a backdrop in here, and this is our level 1 of our burger tutorial. So thank you guys for staying tuned. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, like, comment, and share to your friends, share to others. While in our level 2, we're going to be adding some basic shadings to this burger. We're going to add light, we're going to add camera, and we're going to render our burger. So thanks again for watching.